This time around, I thought I'd do something a bit different. Every month I make a wrap-up video of the books I've read the past month. The difference this time will be that I record talking about the books after I read them instead of waiting until the end of the month. It's now the 6th of May and I've read 2 books, so I thought I would speak about them today. I'm hoping that this will enhance my book reviewing skills by having the knowledge of the books more freshly in my head. In addition to this, if I've had a month where I've read a whole lot of books and there are many books I have to talk about during a video, I'll get a bit exhausted because I spend too much time making these videos. So by doing it this way, I hope to be a little bit more energized while I talk about them. Also now I'm closing in on the 1,000 subscriber mark, and I guess this is one of the big milestones by having a YouTube channel, so I'm sort of just updating my YouTube Studio app all of the time, which is fun and a bit waste of time because it doesn't change all that much. The first book I finished this month was Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. So I read Normal People before, and that one is one of those that really stick around in my head. This one has also been standing here for a while. The book is about Alice and her friends and their complicated relationship. She's a novelist and she has moved away from her friends in Dublin. They don't really understand why she has moved. She doesn't really understand them, and it's all a bit unclear. I would maybe say that they have some of the same problems as in Normal People, only that they're 5 to 10 years older and have corresponding problems. And the first thing that came to mind when I opened this one was how much it resembled Normal People in the tone and the way it's written. I don't often get that feeling, but with this one it was really apparent. It's focused on the people and their problems, and it's very modern. It's not like reading a book that tries to be a classic. Sometimes I feel like authors are afraid of writing about things that may be forgotten in the future, like apps on the phone maybe, but she writes about everything that feels very relevant for this time around. That I find really refreshing. She's not afraid of writing about things that may be forgotten, and in that way she seems very unpretentious. And in sort of the same landscape, this is a pandemic novel and she writes about COVID-19 and how it affected us, and it's a quite clear part of this one. I just find it very refreshing to read a book where it's clear who it's written for and when it's written. And since it's written for people today, it's also kind of uncomfortable. She doesn't shy away from conflict, and the conflict is sort of steadily growing in this one, which I found to be quite intriguing. And there's no issue placing yourself in the shoes of the characters, making them believable and, well, human. Maybe the most fun I had with this one is that Anna Karenina is mentioned in it, and I took the reference. So that one I read last month, and I just felt an enormous amount of joy having that one mentioned in this. And since she's trying to draw parallels between this one and Anna Karenina and their relationship issues, it just made it really clear to me that being able to put yourself in the shoes of the characters is just way more important than I thought for before, I guess. Usually this wouldn't be my kind of novel for people having relationship issues and trying to resolve them, but there were a lot of tension. She managed to build it up through the whole novel, and I just felt like the characters could have been a part of my life. The next one I read also mentions Anna Karenina, and I couldn't be more thrilled, and that is Åsa Linderborg and No One Owns Me. So this hasn't been translated yet, so this is just me translating. A little disclaimer. This is a non-fiction about Åsa Linderborg herself. She is a journalist, writer, historian. I would call her a culture personality. She has many different hats, and I've actually listened to her podcast before I knew about this book. It's about her relationship with her father and growing up. They've basically been left by her mother, and he works at the steel mill and drinks too much. And while this novel is about their relationship, it's also about his relationship to work and politics in Sweden at that time. I think the reason why I picked this up is that on the backside it says something like, I was 4 years old, I was left outside of kindergarten in the dark, and just waited for them to open. And that sentence really just broke my heart. And in the next sentence it says something like, but I loved my father above all. So that pretty much sums this one up, and I thought this would be heart-wrenching all the way through, but it's just so much filled with love from her to him. As I said, they're both being left by his wife and her mother. The mother is still living quite closely by, but she's only with him while her growing up. There are many things I don't understand about this one, but the feeling I'm left with is a feeling of love. I was ready to be heartbroken, but instead there were tears of joy because they are so kind to each other, even though the father doesn't really manage to show her how much he loves her. But he does anyway. It's difficult to explain. He does a lot of stupid things. She's a kid and she's trying to reflect her feelings through her then young eyes. And I think she does so beautifully, but she has way more grown-up thoughts than a kid would have, I think. I'm guessing. Of course, she writes this book later and it's impossible for her to have written the book then. But still, I think it's moments like when the father has to deal with other kids, he sort of trash talks them a bit, but it's just because why aren't they as wonderful as my daughter? She's perfect, why can't you also be perfect? In many ways, I think she has had to be a perfect child because she sort of has to take care of her father as well. I think the thought I'm left with is how much parents mean to their kids, and I sort of reflected on my own situation also while I read it because I have 2 small children, and it's just in the way she describes small things that just meant the world to her makes you understand how things you take for granted children just lives for. I was heartbroken, but not in the way I thought I would be. It's just a beautiful book. I still have a million questions about why things didn't or did happen, but I'll never get the answer, I guess. Seems like it was published in 2007, and she writes about her life like in the 2000s as well, so you get the full picture, but still a lot of questions. I would recommend this to all of you that speak Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, Finnish, German. There are many languages that this is translated to, just not English. So this was basically week 1. Let's do week number 2. As you can see now, I've moved to a new location and I do hope that the trout isn't too distracting. Anyway, a couple of days ago I finished reading On Earth We Were Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is actually one of those that was a part of my first ever book haul, and I've sort of just kept it waiting for a couple of years. The reason being that I thought it might be a bit too complex for me, and maybe I was right. It's written as a letter from a son to his mother that can't read. He has been brought up in the US, but both his mother and grandmother are Vietnamese, and the war is one of the central themes in this one. It feels very much like reading a modern novel. The main character is gay and he describes his first love in the US. He also describes the opioid crisis and all the things related to it, so it feels very much a part of the present. So it's written like a letter, but it still has this fragmented thing to it where it kind of jumps back and forth, and it's not very streamlined. And this is something I struggle with in many novels because I feel like I have to concentrate a whole lot. I think to me the frustrating thing about this is that when I don't really catch what's going on, I get kind of frustrated, but then when it hooks me, and this one really hooks you when it does, because it has this very lovable and close language, I would describe it as. Anyway, when it has these moments of human connection, I'm really dragged into it, but then it releases me and I'm just frustrated that I couldn't just enjoy the moments for a longer period of time. Without going into detail, I would say that this novel has 3 moments where it really gripped me, but then it lost me, and that's just frustrating. Basically, it's the moments where it describes the connection between 2 people and the closeness that he manages to produce. Take for example when the main character falls in love. This is described in such a close and intimate, romantic and good way, but then the rest of the novel happens and it loses me again. I think it's my own head telling me that I don't pay attention and I just get frustrated. I would also say that when these moments that I enjoyed occurs, they sort of sneak up on you and surprises you. So I was reading and then suddenly it just hits you with emotion. I liked it, but I just wanted it to continue a bit more. I also think that I could have enjoyed this novel more if I grew up in the US or knew more about the Vietnam War. You might say that there were several moments where I felt like I understood, but not fully. I think I'm going to sum this one up as yet again one of those where if I had more patience, I would have enjoyed it more, but I don't. Also, it feels like a bit too complex for me, or maybe also a bit pretentious. But since I recognize that there are parts of this one that are beautiful, I might just have to believe that the whole thing really is, but I didn't get the whole thing, I got parts of it. That's at least how it feels. I finally read it. Probably won't read more of his novels because I don't think they're made for me. Yesterday I finished yet another book by Richard Osman, and that is The Man Who Died Twice, the sequel to the Thursday Murder Club, and now the Thursday Murder Club series, and I absolutely loved it. It's about the same people in this retirement village trying to solve cases, and in this one Elizabeth's ex shows up. I guess I loved this one for the same reasons that I loved the first novel in this series, and that's mostly due to the characters. They're truly some of the most lovable characters I've ever read about. They have a very different personality in between them, and they react to growing old and to solving murder cases in completely different ways. And they're just such a gorgeous bunch of people. But one of the new aspects in this one is how they comment on the world around them. They're now pretty up to date, and one of the characters think about how you can't really joke about anything anymore. And then they reflect on how people were bullied earlier for things that's okay today. And so it's a very nice way of summing up a debate from an old person's view, just with a younger person's mind, I would say. This may have been something they also talk about in the first novel, because growing old is a very central thing, and they talk about things changing around them. So it might have been I just didn't think about it when reading the first one, at least. Also, this introduces a couple of new characters which were really funny, and also develops some characters from the first novel that really has a bright, shining future, I guess. Or I hope. I think I wrote down when I read it that it's a book of unsung heroes, because there's so many characters that don't play a huge role, but they play a critical one, and they're also beautiful. Right from the start, I knew this was supposed to be a 5-star for me. It's just in the way the dialogue works, it just flows. It's such a feel-good novel. It makes you happy, it could make you sad, but mostly it makes you happy. And I recommend this to all people around the world. And I'm happy I read it now. I'm surely going to read the third one as well. Since I'm filming these clips like spread out, I'm now beginning to wonder if they're all starting and ending kind of similar. I'm guessing that all of them are starting in the way like, and now I've finished, and now I've just finished, or I recently finished, or a couple of days ago I finished. I don't know, we'll just see how this all turns out. But anyway, I just finished Kim Line's Kalak. This one I bought a couple of years ago. I thought I'd really like it because it seems so grim. It's about Kim Line himself, and this is his debut novel. Maybe 1 year ago I finished The Prophets of the Eternal Fjord by Kim Line, and that one I didn't really enjoy that much because it was so big and had too many words in it, so I was a bit skeptical about this one. Kalak is the term that the native people of Greenland use about themselves, and Kim Line starts out in Norway. He's a part of the Jehovah's Witness. Then he moves to Denmark, where he is sexually abused by his father. And to escape all this, he moves to Greenland, where he tries to solve all his problems in the most unhealthy ways possible. And when I say, he tries all of them. This is of course why this novel at times is kind of grim, but it focuses on different aspects than I thought it would. So he is a nurse, and he works as a nurse / doctor in Greenland. In this role, he can basically do whatever he wants because they have a shortage of staff. When he talks about these things like doing the work of a nurse in Greenland, I think this is maybe the most enjoyable thing about it. You get the feeling of learning something about this place that is completely different from where you live, and I found that part fascinating. And maybe this is the most fascinating thing just because he talks so much about his abuse and how he doesn't deal with life. In the same way that with his other book that I read, there are just too many words. And it's a bit repetitive. Also, sometimes he likes to talk about language and his own language because he writes his father, they exchange letters. He also writes a lot on the side, and he just reflects a lot about his own language, which it's just not for me. Reading this also made me think back to when I read Knausgård. When reading Knausgård, I thought, well, this is kind of awkward having written about himself, but the things that both happens to Kim Leine and that he describes about himself in this book, it's enough to make you want to bury your face in a pillow at times. I don't really think I could have been that honest even with myself, so if I wrote this book about myself and knew that I was the only one that was supposed to read it, I don't think I could have done it. So maybe a big kudos to him for making this book at this level, because it's just so painful to read at times. Both him revisiting his past in the way people around him have abused him, but also in the way that he talks about his own behavior, and he doesn't sugarcoat, to say the least. I actually wrote down that this is the first time I've read a book and felt like it was brave of the author to write it. I don't know why that is, because I've read about people suffering before, like when I read Educated. That was also one of the brave books, but this is brave in a different way. Maybe it's because he does a lot of criminal things that he writes about and is being so honest about. All in all, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I did really enjoy it, but it was a roller coaster of philosophy, pain and suffering. At times it was a bit too much. But it also feels like he did exactly what he planned to do. He wrote down his feelings and experiences, he published it in a book, and this made him famous, and he got a career in writing. And apparently people like all his other books as well, so in one way it's a success. It's just a very sad success in many ways. But this was book number 5, I think. Let's see where we end up next. Then unfortunately I finished this one, Life of Pi by Jan Martel. I don't think I would have known about this without the movie, because that's of course a huge hit. It won the Booker Prize in 2002 and it was utterly boring. Basically the whole thing is about a young boy and a tiger stuck on a boat. Just a little disclaimer, I listened to this on audiobook and the audiobook version was 7 hours. It is an abridged version and I'm just guessing that it would have been like 3 hours more if it was the full version. I don't think this one would have benefited from having 3 more hours to it. The first thing that struck me when I started listening to this was how much it reminded me of my experience when reading The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And for those of you that have watched my review of that one, you know that that's not a good thing. I believe that the thing that got me thinking about Paulo Coelho is that it stated that this story will make you believe in God. In general, I just despise this. It has nothing to do with religion. It's just a feeling that the authors think they have to push a message on you instead of just writing a book and making you feel stuff. So if you have to tell me that I will believe in God when I finish reading a book, I can guarantee you that that's not the feeling I'm left with. So what's the point? And why did I even finish reading this one? Well, I think I was expecting this to be sort of adventurous and a lot of things happening. If you write a novel that has won the Booker Prize and made into a cinematic masterpiece, I haven't watched the movie, I've just heard good things, then I just assumed that it would be exciting at some point, but it never was. And I'm not going to spoil anything, I just had hoped that a lot more things would have happened. Of course, this one also has a touch of magical realism or fantasy or whatever you want to call it. Like Paulo Coelho, it seems just to be pushed into the story when they run out of imagination, I guess. I think this might be the first time where I listened to an abridged audiobook version and actually ended up being happy that it was. I don't feel like I'm missing out, you might say. Towards the end of this, there was one moment where I thought, well, now we're getting somewhere, and then my excitement died within a few moments. So, ended up just despising this whole thing. I have no idea why this won the Booker Prize. The thought of this winning that award will haunt me for quite some time. I'm not happy I read it, I should have DNF'd it. At the moment where I started feeling this Coelho vibe, I should have just let it go. Have I learned something from this? I doubt it, as usual. And then there was this one, Hør Herra by Gulrez Sharif. This month's biggest surprise. and almost impossible not to compare to Tante Ulrikes Vei by Cezanne Chacao, which I've talked about on this channel earlier. It's about 15-year-old Mahmoud. He lives in Oslo and he has Norwegian Pakistani parents, and he gets a visit from a horny uncle from Pakistan. I think that's the correct way of putting it, and on top of this, his brother is coming out as a girl. It's safe to say that this book shoots in all directions all at once. I'm not really sure what I expected of this when I started, but I got more than I expected, that's for sure. And I listened to this on audiobook and I'm very happy I did. It's something about the way his mother mistreats him. He talks a lot about her sandals and how she hits him, but it's in this loving way, and I do think that if I had read it in the book instead of listening to it, I would maybe have misunderstood some of the times that he got beaten, I guess. Also, this audiobook might have had my favorite reader of all time. He was just excellent, totally made a difference. This isn't a really big book. The audio version is about 4 hours, but it seems a lot bigger than it is. Maybe it has to do with the themes. So he's talking about how he's not fitting into this country. He's 15 years old, and how politicians might not like his kind, at the same time as his brother is coming out as a girl. And there's just a lot going on, but it's just hysterically funny in the way he describes it. Even it's hard talking about. It's very feel-good at the same time as it contains the sadness and the depth and the heaviness of it all. I do not like my own explanation for this, but I gave this one a very clear 5-star. I do not myself like to use big words, but this one deserves it, and he uses big words himself in a small package, so a full score. And a huge surprise. There's no easy way of doing this transition because these reads couldn't have been more different, because now I'm about to talk about what seems to be the biggest Norwegian author on BookTube at the moment, and I'm kinda nervous. The reason, of course, is that I've now read The Other Name and I Is Another by Jon Fosse, the 2 first books in the septology, which I know many of you have been thinking about reading. I think I'll just try to sum these ones up together. I think that might be the easiest route to go. When I started reading the first one, I really struggled to stay awake. I was extremely bored and I had a lot of questions. You might say that this is the piece of literature that I've read where I have the most questions about. The base premise is that you have these 2 artists called Asle and Asle, lives in a small place on the western part of Norway. Yeah, that's basically the plot. One of them seems to be the central figure, whilst the other one is sort of in the periphery, and we jump back and forth. We jump back and forth in time, and it also switches between the first and the third person. And these switches between the time periods seems to be quite crucial for me as a reader to keep my focus up. They're so incredibly smooth that if you don't pay attention, you might miss them and be confused. Or at least that's what I was. And it wasn't until I finished the first novel, went on Goodreads and read a review of Jake, a friend of the channel. I like that expression, so I'll just call you a friend of this channel. He talked about the rhythm in the novels, and after I began thinking about it as a rhythm, it got a lot easier, but I decided to do the second one on audiobook to see if that helps, because there isn't a lot of punctuation. There's no full stops, at least that I noticed. It's just hard to read when you don't know when to take breaks. Maybe this is something that comes with training. If you've read a lot of books, you're more accustomed to how you take breaks in your reading. But if there's no full stops anywhere, I found it to be a bit exhausting. When I started listening to the second book, things were a lot better, mostly because he had many natural breaks and he had this rhythm that made it easier for me to follow the story, even though the story is so slow that it's impossible to know if you're getting somewhere at all. There are moments where I'm a bit engaged and I'm wondering about what's going to happen next, but there's so few that it's not worth it. At the same time, it's so weird in many ways, especially how he uses the names of the place he visits. So he calls Bergen for Björgvin, which is the old name for the place. And he does this with a lot of places that he uses in the story, and he refers only to old buildings and things from the past. He makes it feel like you're in the Middle Ages sometimes, but then he talks about cars. As I said in the beginning, there are a lot of questions, which makes it interesting, and that sort of annoys me because the story isn't that riveting. The positive thing about how he writes is that I become a very conscious reader, so when I read his books I'm really focused and I think about things that I normally wouldn't, like symbolism and wording and how like all the things are put together. I don't know if that's a positive or not, but I do like finding myself in that role. I would say that the books have mainly two themes, it's God and arts, and in the first one there is a lot of talk about God and that doesn't really interest me, but in the second one art is one of those themes that are more and more discussed, and it's really interesting, and again I'm more alert to what I'm reading and thus maybe it just makes it better for me. But anyway, I will definitely read the last book in this series. It is something special, but I'm pretty sure that the special thing about it is how I think about Jon Fosse and not the actual things I'm reading. They're really not my cup of tea, but I'm interested to see where all this is heading. And we've come to the last read of this month, and it's Bad Dad by David Walliams. This is the 5th novel from David Walliams that I've read, and it's about Frank. I think he's 11 years old. He has a father that is a racing car driver, a very successful one, but one day he is in an accident and he can't race professionally no more. And this leads to Frank's mother leaving him and his father. I thought Frank was a very weird name for a kid. Seems so grown up, so all through this book I thought that Frank was the father, but I know it's the kid. But anyway, since the father can't drive anymore and he's unhappy with his wife leaving him, he hasn't got a new job and he can't support his family, so this leads him to becoming a criminal. Thus, Bad Dad. In general, I thought the plot was kinda cool, but this tries a bit too hard. I know it's a children's novel, but it really wants you to become emotionally invested, not by building the story and the characters, rather throwing out like wisdom and things that are supposed to be sad but really isn't when you don't feel like you have a connection with the characters. In some of his other books there has been plot twists that makes the story a bit more engaging. This didn't have that to that extent, or if they tried doing it, it didn't work. Here's an example. There has been made a point and then there is just a couple of pages giving examples of what this point is. Of course it's more fun for kids than for me. I feel like they're kind of cheap sometimes, and if you don't feel invested in the rest of the story, they feel a bit too much. I also felt like some shortcuts were being made when he wrote this, so he writes a lot of books. I have no idea how many there are, but I have like 12 standing in my shelves. I don't know, maybe I should just slow down and like write half of the books that he does today. Maybe that would help. But I did enjoy this novel. It's fun, it's simple, it's quick, and there are a lot of fun characters, even though I wish that I knew them more. So that concludes the reads for this month. I have no idea how this will look. I've just filmed all the pieces and now I will try to glue them together. You have watched it now, so please comment below if you think this seemed to be a good idea. I also don't know if this improved my book reviewing skills. One could always improve on different things, and I thought this was a good idea. I felt for some of the books it kinda helped doing it straight afterwards, but reviewing Jon Fosse, for example, seems like a thing where you should wait a couple of years before you talk about them. Some days have passed since I read them, and I feel like I'm constantly thinking about them. That is no surprise at all, but I still do, and that tends to do something with how I think of myself liking the books. I feel like every time I do a wrap up, I think of the month that has passed as sort of a roller coaster reading month, since I always give a book at least a 4-star and then a 2-star, and it feels like there's a big jump between those two. But then you have months like this where I feel like several of these could become 5 stars. You have Richard Osmond, which is of course one of the books I gave 5 stars. Then you have Sally Rooney, which feels like something that could grow on me. Then you have Åsa Lindeborg. That also was a book that I thoroughly enjoyed. Kim Leine was a disappointment. Life of Pi I despised, which was kind of a shock. Then you have Gula's Sharif, which I absolutely loved. Ocean Wong's book also I didn't enjoy at all. So this was truly one of those months with books all over the spectrum. And I don't know, some of these books just made me feel like this is why I do this. Sometimes when I read a lot of bad books or even books with 4 stars, I get the feeling that should I just give up reading books because it's not enough? But then I read like The Man Who Died Twice and I love it, and I feel like it's just pure fun and I can't really put the book down. So I don't know, is this normal feelings? I know that I've been doing this for 2 years now, but I still get a lot of like childish readers' thoughts. That's at least what I call them. I think this might be the issue with doing it like this, because now I've only talked about one book and I have so much energy left. Whilst if I had talked about all the books today, I would have been exhausted from myself. So I feel like I should have stopped talking now. But there's one more thing. I did a live stream and that is as always very fun, but I seem to have a bit of technical issue, and I've been thinking about buying a new computer for the last 2 years, and I finally did, which means that if you see many like unnecessary effects on my channel going forward, that's only because I can now without spending weeks doing it. So that will maybe be a change, and if you're annoyed by them, I'm sorry. I know many of them probably will be useless, but we'll just have to wait and see. Even to myself, I'm not that predictable. But anyway, thank you for watching this video. I hope you have a very good June, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!